don't you just love it when celebrities get into knitting and clearly have very little experience and immediately get hailed as experts and set up their own business? Everyone thinks they're wonderful, they get promoted, they get all the opportunities, and they're just amazing because clearly they've been knitting for 5 minutes and they clearly know it all. Any guesses who I'm talking about? So today I'm going to have a little bit of a rant about celebrities who get into knitting or any other kind of hobby really, and immediately kind of get elevated to expert status and try to teach people what to do when they clearly haven't got a clue what they're doing. So I hope you enjoyed today's video, and I will have a bit of a rant. And when you hear who I'm ranting about, you're probably not going to be surprised. But I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you're new here, my name is Anniken. I design knitting patterns. I teach knitting workshops online and in person, and I sell yarn through my website YarnAddict.co.uk. I normally post videos every Friday where I talk about what I'm knitting, any yarn purchases, what I'm crocheting. That's kind of what I'm working on really. And then on Tuesdays, I post a video on something else. That can either be a tutorial or a hot topic in the knitting world, or a topic in the knitting or crochet world that I have an opinion about, and I'm quite opinionated. And before Christmas, I posted several review videos of the Game of Wool, and they did really well, especially the first one went a bit viral for me. I think last time I looked, they had over 5,000 views, and I think it's my first video ever to get that many views. And it's increased the number of subscribers on my YouTube channel, and I hope some of you who subscribed then are still sticking around and watching. My subscriber number is gradually ticking up. But for most of us who start in the knitting business, it is a slow, steady to build your audience. I've been doing this for 20 years. I've been designing knitting patterns and teaching knitting workshops for 20 years. It is, and I'm saying this as a past middle-aged. My kids will say I'm past middle-aged. I'm 56, so yes, I'm probably past middle-aged because I'm probably not going to live till I'm 112. So slightly past middle-aged woman, white woman, who's been knitting all her life. But women like me are a bit invisible in the knitting world because there's so many of us. And if somebody comes along and they're either much younger, or they're a man, or they're a young man especially, or there's anything else that makes them kind of stand out a bit more from the sea of middle-aged and older white women, then they tend to get a lot more attention very quickly. If they're also a celebrity, then they shoot straight to the stars immediately. So I am talking about Tom Daley. He is a diver, an Olympian. He's won loads of Olympic medals. I think he's probably won other world championships and whatever as well. He actually is local to where I live in Cornwall. He grew up in Plymouth, which is just across the border in Devon, in the next county along, about half an hour from where I live. And he grew up there. He went to school there. He started his diving career there. And so he's been on our local news since he was a teenager. I think I googled his age. I think he's in his early 30s now, a few years older than my oldest daughter. And I'm going to specifically talk about him, but it also helps illustrate a bigger problem, bigger issue, I think. So part of me thinks that when a celebrity gets into knitting and it gets knitting talked about and publicized, that's probably good for knitting as a whole, or craft businesses as a whole. I guess it applies to celebrities who get into any kind of craft, really. But it does get frustrating when they then launch businesses related to their new hobby, and they clearly aren't creating the designs themselves and writing the patterns and doing pattern support and all that kind of stuff. They're clearly paying somebody else to do that. They're probably not even developing their own yarns. They're just putting their name on it, basically. And I do find it a bit frustrating when they do that and they don't credit the designer who's actually helped them create those patterns. I know a lot of young companies don't credit their designers either. Most designers these days are independent and work as freelance designers. So if you work for a young company or a magazine or anything like that, it's really nice to be credited because it means other people can see what you're doing and it helps you get more work. I know that I've got work because I've appeared in certain magazines. And that's important if you're a freelance designer, because you rely on that to constantly get new work. So I don't know who creates Tom Daley's patterns for his yarn line and pattern line, but I wish they were credited. Now, when Game of Wool started in November, or was it end of October? I can't remember. But when it started, I was a little bit confused. I thought, is Game of Wool, was it a Tom Daley idea? Did he come up with this idea and pitched it to a production company and Channel 4 commissioned it? Was it Channel 4's idea? I doubt it very much. At one point I thought maybe it was the two judges, Di Gilpin and Sheila Richardson. I think I'm remembering her surname correctly, but Di and Sheila, I thought maybe it was their idea, mainly because it's something that I read on, I think it was Di's Instagram at some point. I thought, oh, maybe the idea came from them. But I spent most of the series thinking the idea came from Tom Daley. On the back of Game of Wool, or at the same time as Game of Wool launched, they also launched a YouTube channel called Let's Get Knitting. I'm not going to link it below. If you want to find it, just search for it. It's easy to find. Just type in Let's Get Knitting and you'll find it. And I thought it was like a Game of Wool spin-off. I think they got about 65 videos and nearly 11,000 subscribers when I looked before I started filming this. And the first few videos are all kind of follow-up videos to Game of Wool, talking about the previous episode. I haven't actually looked at any of them, but that seems to be what they were talking about. Maybe what the knitters were wearing, and then they do interviews with the judges and Jane Crowfoot, who was the guest judge on one episode. There's also an interview with a lady from Torquay in Devon who has a business called That Crafty Stitch. I follow her on Instagram. She's got quite a huge following. She owns a sort of knitting crochet shop in Torquay, but I get the impression she only sells her own brand yarn. So everything she sells is branded and it's only her own designs. But she does seem to have a huge following. There's an interview with her which I haven't watched yet. I might watch it at some point. And then recently, since January, it's been all tutorials. So Tom Daley doing tutorials. So I'm assuming Let's Get Knitting, I thought first it was like a Channel 4 YouTube channel or like a Game of Wool YouTube channel, like spin-off from the TV series. And it was run by the production company or I don't know, whoever. But now I'm assuming it's a Tom Daley YouTube channel because it does seem to now be solely tutorials posted by him. He's not been knitting for that long. He came to prominence in the knitting community during the, I think it was the Tokyo Olympics, when he was filmed knitting, watching diving competitions. And everyone's like, oh, amazing, how fantastic. And then quickly after that, he's obviously now retired from diving. And presumably he needs to create some kind of business for himself and some kind of career for himself. He's fairly young, he's only in his early 30s. So he's always decided that part of his income streams are going to be crafting. So he started a yarn line, patterns, as I mentioned, and he was the presenter for Game of Wool. He was also on the Celebrity Traitors here in the UK last summer, autumn. I can't remember when he was on. I haven't really gotten into the Traitors, but I watched a couple of episodes because my daughters were home and they really liked watching it. But he was on the last Celebrity Traitors here in the UK. I think he was also on Bake Off. I think they do a celebrity version as well, but again, it's not a show I watch. And then he was the presenter of Game of Wool. And I think the general consensus was that he wasn't great at it. They would have been better off going with a professional presenter, I think. But what's caused a lot of criticism this week is a recent tutorial he did on his Let's Get Knitting YouTube channel. Some tutorials on his YouTube channel now. And he, I think it was end of January, I thought I wrote it down, but I can't see it here. But I think it was end of January. He posted a tutorial, decreasing tutorial, SKPO, SSK, and knit two together. And this, just before I started recording this, it had over 2,000 views. and about less than 30 comments. And most of those comments are people saying, you're doing it all wrong. So if you haven't watched it, do go and watch it. I do appreciate, so I'm not making fun of people who get SSK and SKP all wrong. I have taught probably hundreds of knitters, yeah, definitely hundreds of knitters, SSK, because I teach it in several of my workshops. And loads of people do it wrong, especially if they're self-taught. So if they've learned it just from reading the instructions in the pattern, it's very common to get SSK wrong. So I'm not shaming people for getting things wrong, but I do think it takes a certain amount of confidence to be getting it all wrong and then immediately record a YouTube tutorial about it. When I record a tutorial or when I teach something, I make sure I know that topic fairly well and I can answer questions around that topic. So he was, in this video, Tom was showing people how to do SSK. I do have a video actually, I have 2 tutorials on my channel. One is called Left Leaning Decreases and Improved SSK. That was posted in February 2024, so nearly 2 years ago. I will leave the link below this video and I'll also link it at the end of this video. Then I also have a similar tutorial from 2022, which I won't bother linking that. I'll link the latest one, because I do it correctly. So there are a couple of different variations of the SSK. The standard way to do it is you slip one stitch knitwise, you slip a second stitch knitwise, and then you put your left needle in from the left and knit the 2 together through the back loop. So you end up twisting the stitches, so when you knit them together through the back loop, they lean to the left. And it's a neat decrease. It's considered to be the best alternative for a left-leaning decrease to match a knit 2 together, which leans to the right. So knit 2 together leans to the right, SSK leans to the left, and SSK is considered the best left-leaning decrease. Does it look as smooth as knit 2 together? No, it doesn't. The improved version of it, which is what I do now, is slip one stitch knitwise, slip the second one purlwise, and then put your left needle into the front of those 2 stitches from the left, and so your needles kind of cross over each other and then knit them together. You're basically slipping them by changing the orientation of the stitch and then knitting them together through the back loop. What Tom Daley does is he slips one purlwise, then he slips the second one purlwise, and then he twists his needle around and knits them with the needle coming in from the right. And what he's basically doing is a knit 2 together through the back loop, but he's doing it in a really, really difficult way. The most basic left leaning decrease you can do is knit 2 together through the back loop, except it doesn't look very good. If you're doing it in garter stitch, it's fine. I also like it for doing an I-cord cast off, because I think it looks better. But for most other left leaning decreases, I will use the SSK where you slip the second stitch purlwise. So the fact that he does basically what's a knit 2 together through the back of the loop, but the way he's slipping the stitches doesn't do anything. So he's making things a lot more difficult for himself. He's making the decrease take a lot longer and more difficult to do and more awkward to do. If he wants to do that decrease, just knit 2 together through the back loop. So he's doing that completely wrong, which most of the comments are telling him. I'm assuming he doesn't read the comments because none of the comments have been replied to, and this video has been up for over a week now and is still there. So I'm assuming nobody's monitoring the comments. And then he also does an SKPO, which is slip one, knit one, pass slip stitch over. And you slip the first stitch knitwise. Now he slips it purlwise, which makes it look not as good. You slip the first stitch knitwise, you knit one, then you pass the slip stitch over the knit one. And it's a fairly basic SSK. It's probably what most people were used to before the SSK became popular. When I teach workshops where I use decreases, especially lace knitting, most people know how to do the slip on, knit on, pass slip stitch over, especially if they've been knitting for a long time, but not everyone knows how to do the SSK. So I usually try and encourage people to do the SSK because it just looks a lot neater. So he does both of those 2 wrong. Then he does also show how to do a knit 2 together, which he does correctly. So he got 1 out of the 3 correctly. The only thing that I would disagree a little bit with, but that's just a little extra tip here for you, when he does the knit 2 together, he says to leave a stitch, a safety stitch at the end of the needle. So he said if you decreasing, knit 2 together at the end of the row, knit 2 last 3 stitches, knit 2 together, leave a stitch, knit 1 so you have a stitch at the end to make picking up stitches and sewing up easier. If you're going to sew up, I actually would leave 2 stitches at the end or beginning of the row. If you're decreasing at the beginning and end of the row, have 2 stitches at the beginning and 2 at the end that are just plain knit stitches, plain stocking stitch, because that means if you do mattress stitch, you can sew up using the channel between those 2 stitches to sew up. I talk about that in my finishing techniques course. I teach it in person in classes. My next one is actually going to be at Stitch Festival in London in March, where I'm teaching a seaming knitted fabric workshop, just an hour quick workshop showing you how to do mattress stitch. And I talk about that there. But I also teach it in my online finishing techniques workshop. So if you're interested in that, I will link it below. All my finishing techniques to make sure your sweaters look fabulous. And I would say that I think Mr. Daley could do with taking my online finishing techniques workshop. Should I send him it as a freebie? No, he can afford to pay for it. So I think it gets frustrating when celebrities get promoted and treated as experts when they're clearly not. I don't know how long he's been knitting for, and I don't know how much knitting he does. Most of the knitting that I've seen him do on his YouTube channel and on his Instagram doesn't look that great. His knitting looks quite uneven. Now, that can be one of many reasons. The fact that a lot of knitters will finish knitting something and then complain that their stitches look uneven. Your stitches will never be as even as a machine knitted fabric because you're not a machine. If you want perfectly even uniform stitches, you need to get into machine knitting, which is completely different and brings with it a whole host of other frustrations. Trust me, I have 2 knitting machines sitting in that corner and they've not been used for a while because they get a bit frustrating. Also, what usually creates uneven fabric can be lack of experience and your tension, but it can also be the yarn you're using. Some yarns just look more even than others. Sometimes if you're using the wrong needle size for the stitch you're doing and the yarn you're using, it can look uneven, so that would be your tension. And also if it's not blocked properly. So blocking can mean wet blocking it, pressing it, just washing it and leaving it flat to dry. Loads of different ways to block stuff, but blocking does improve things, and I don't think Tom Daley knows how to do that, because a lot of the knitting I've seen him do does not look good, and that is me getting a little bit bitchy, so I will leave that there. Now, Tom Daley did post recently on his Instagram that he was in Plymouth visiting family. As I said, Plymouth's only half an hour away, so if Tom Daley's watching, or if anyone knows him, next time you're in Plymouth, Tom, send me a message. You can DM me on Instagram. We'll arrange to meet up. I'll drive down to Plymouth. We'll meet up. I'll give you a few knitting lessons because you got potential, but you need a proper teacher who can teach you how to do it properly before you start teaching other people how to do it. So what I think a lot of us find frustrating is that there's lots of designers, teachers, and experienced knitters who've been doing this for decades and really know their stuff. And especially those of us who do it as a job, who are struggling to make a living. And then we get people like Tom Daley, who are clearly beginners, who get all the glory, all the money, and just cash in on a hobby, which they may not even stick with for that long. And a lot of us find that very frustrating. And I do think, and I think this, I don't always agree with this, but I think if it's a man who is not very experienced, clearly not very experienced, and gets promoted above a more experienced woman, then I think a lot of people, especially women, find that more frustrating. I think that's a little bit unfair, maybe. I don't know. I think anything that makes you stand out, and being a man in the knitting world does make you stand out. Being very young in the knitting world makes you stand out. A 50+ white woman in the knitting world does not make you stand out because there are a gazillion of us. So if anything, if you have any thing with your age, your gender, whatever that makes you stand out, you will get noticed more just because of who you are, and that's fine. I don't have a huge problem with that, but I do have a problem with knitting celebrities thinking they're experts when they're clearly not. So tell me, did you watch the tutorial? I haven't watched any of its other tutorials. I just can't be bothered, to be quite honest. I went and watched this one because I read about it on social media, so I went and watched it. But I'm not watching the other ones, and I have not subscribed to his channel. It does annoy me a bit that people obviously aren't reading the comments. Now, I am behind with reading I'm replying to comments on my own channel, but I aim to reply to all comments. It's just since I started posting Game of Wool videos, I've been getting a lot more comments and getting behind on it. And when I get behind on work, my way of coping is to ignore it and pretend it doesn't exist, which is not a good thing. So I'm trying to get through a few comments a day till I catch up on all the comments. So if you're thinking, you're if I want to talk, I left a comment on your channel and you haven't replied to it, I am trying. I do try and reply to everyone. I've just been a bit overwhelmed in the last 3 months. I don't think anyone's monitoring the Let's Get Knitting channel. I did actually leave one comment where I left a link to my tutorial, but I think that got deleted. So I left another comment just saying, you're doing it all wrong. If you want a proper tutorial, there's one on my channel. Anyway, let me know what you think. Did you watch the tutorial? What do you think of this topic in general? Is it good that famous people get into knitting even if they aren't very good at it or they're doing it all wrong because it gets more publicity for knitting? I do think that there is something in that. And even though a lot of knitters, virtually every knitter I've spoken to since the Game of Wool aired, have thought it was awful, I have also heard from Yansha Bonus that it has brought them more customers and it has brought new people into knitting. So I guess that's a good thing. Now, are the nearly 11,000 who follow this Let's Get Knitting channel, are they all beginners? I don't know. Are the people just kind of hate watching? Possibly. I don't know. Anyway, share your views in the comments. If you like this video, like and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Thanks for watching.